Talya. I'm 23, I'm from London, and I identify as queer/bisexual. Growing up, I didn't really have any big moments of realisation about my sexuality. I think a lot of people think that LGBT people have like this big dramatic experience and dramatic moments of like realising things and coming out, but I never really had that. I sort of just gradually realised over time and would look back at experiences and realise, oh, that's why like I felt like that, or that's why I behaved like that. So it was a very slow, gradual process of coming to the realisation eventually about my sexuality. And I sort of didn't really have that like internal monologue of like talking to myself about it. I just always sort of brushed it off or like didn't really think about it. And I think that it's important for people to know that they don't have to have like super negative experiences or like really dramatic or like big coming out experiences or you know, first relationship experiences or anything like that. It's okay to just sort of suddenly one day be like, oh yeah, this is me. I think there's definitely a problem with the lack of representation of bisexuality just like in society as a whole. Even in the LGBT community, like bisexuality is the biggest like proportion of the community, but it's usually the one that's like the least seen. And growing up, I didn't really have any representations of bisexuality, you know, tangible, available to me. I knew what gay and lesbian was, and I knew what straight was. Everyone knew what straight was, but there was no option for anything else sort of presented to me or anyone I knew. And if anyone was in a relationship with someone of the same gender, or even like kiss someone of the same gender, everyone would be like, oh, so they're gay now. I've been asked before, like, oh, so if you're in a relationship with a woman, are you lesbian then? And it's really irritating, actually, because of the lack of visibility of bisexuality. I think that's why people tend not to understand it, and why I tend to get asked questions like, oh, so if you're with a woman, are you lesbian now? Or like people saying like, oh, I don't understand how that works. Like, how can you possibly be attracted to more than one gender? And I think it's just because there was nothing out there like for me to be able to grasp that and understand that that was even a possibility. I think that's why it might have taken me so long to even understand my own sexuality. And I think if those sorts of role models or representations were out there, you know, like nowadays we have a lot more celebrities who are coming out and saying they're bisexual, whereas before, if a celebrity came out and said that they weren't straight, everyone was just like, oh, okay, so they're gay, and just put them in that box. And I think now people are starting to realise that we don't necessarily need boxes, or if we do decide to identify with labels, it's a lot more diverse than just gay or straight. In my opinion, the reason bisexuality is so underrepresented is because it's more complex than just who you're with, and people tend to reduce your sexuality to who you're with. So if they see two women together, they assume that they're a gay couple, and if they see a man and a woman together, they assume they're a straight couple. But you can't tell what people's sexualities are just by looking at them, or even just by talking to them. You won't necessarily know, but people tend to reduce it down to who someone is currently with, and it's not necessarily like that. Who I am as a bisexual woman is separate from who I date or who I'm attracted to. Like, those are two different things. And when you're with someone, like who you are can sort of like be erased a bit and become invisible, because people just look at who you're with and make their assumptions based on that. My experiences coming out to my family were quite positive, actually. I sort of tested the waters with my mum about a year before I actually came out to her. I was in the car with her and I just suddenly asked her, Mum, what would you do if I was gay? And she asked me, well, she said to me, are you trying to tell me something? And I was like, no, I'm just asking. And she said, well, I'd have to get my head around it, but I'd still love you, obviously. And I wasn't wholeheartedly convinced by that answer, but I just thought, well, you know, that's better than what a lot of my friends have experienced when they tell their parents. And then about a year later, I was on my year abroad in the Netherlands, and I was a performer at the TEDx event in Utrecht. And the theme was change from within. So they asked me to write something about change from within. And I sort of used it as a way to force myself to write something in order to help me come out. And the event was filmed. And so I had a bit of a panic because I thought the footage would come out really soon. So when I Skyped my mum the next day, I decided to tell her what it was about, because I didn't want to just like present her with the footage and be like, there's the explanation, haha. So I had a Skype call with my mum, and I told her that I was bisexual, and I tried to sort of explain what that meant to me, and she had a very good reaction, and sort of said all the right things. So that was nice. And the rest of my family have been really good about it as well. But I do sometimes feel worried and a little bit scared, because I've never brought anyone home to meet them who's not a guy. And there's sort of this thing, because I'm Jewish as well, there's sort of this stereotype of like settling down with a nice Jewish boy. And I think most of my family still sort of have that in their head, and I think that they won't really fully like understand and like accept that I'm not straight until I bring someone home who's not a nice Jewish boy. So yeah, that sometimes makes me feel quite anxious, and probably affects like how willing I am to sort of like get out there and really date anyone who's not a man, because I might be a little bit worried about how my family will react, but hopefully it will be a good experience when it does happen. Some of the things that really annoy me about the stereotypes that I get are, for example, when people like expect that bisexual people are more likely to behave in certain ways or more likely to do certain things just because we're attracted to more than one gender. So for example, a lot of people always assume that bisexual people are more likely to cheat on their partner just because they might be attracted to other people, but that's not necessarily true at all. And I think if people understood more about the differences between, you know, straight, gay, bisexual, other sexualities as well, I think that then people would have more information and they wouldn't keep asking the same questions that people like me have to hear all the time, that I'm honestly just fed up of hearing. When I was growing up, a lot of the time, because I didn't have any big negative experiences and I was never like bullied or like targeted specifically based on the fact that I was bisexual, because I hadn't said that to anyone, I'd only like felt it inside, I didn't feel like I deserved or had like earned a label in the LGBT community because I hadn't had negative experiences. So that sort of just shows that like the fact that most LGBT stories out there are always dramatic and the family has a negative reaction and it's always a rebellion and all that stuff, that sort of invalidates any like more muted or just quiet and gradual experiences where it's not all fireworks and it's not all going off and you're not having to like come out in like one big Facebook status or one big you know, like outcry or something. It's just there and it's just part of me, and it was never really like a big loud like thing. I feel very fortunate to be part of a religion that, at least in the UK at the moment, is taking proper steps towards integrating the LGBT community within the faith. So recently the chief rabbi has released a document along with some other LGBT Jewish individuals that's sort of like a guidance for teachers in Jewish schools to combat bullying against LGBT pupils, and also just to try and help increase levels of compassion and understanding of the fact that LGBT Jews do exist and they are growing up in schools and they need looking after as well. I was very skeptical of the document. I thought it was going to be very wishy-washy and like, oh yeah, LGBT people exist, like here's like 2 pages about it. But it was a very thorough document, and you could tell that it had definitely involved LGBT people in its creation. And I sat and I read the whole thing through, and I was teary when I was done, because I was thinking, imagine if teachers had had this when I was growing up. I mean, I don't know if it still happens, but when I was at school, people would always say, oh, that's so gay, like in a derogatory way, like as if gay means bad. And that was just completely accepted. And that was like one of the biggest examples in the document of like things that are not acceptable to say. And so if that's going into schools now and teachers are going to be stamping out that kind of behaviour, that's already a massive step in the right direction. And this document that I was so like skeptical of and like really not sure about, you know, like Judaism and LGBT really going hand in hand, I was so happy when I was done reading it, because it wasn't a document that was saying like, oh, this is what's right and this is what's wrong. It was more addressing the fact that like LGBT people exist, and regardless of what religious or you know, like literal written Judaism might say about it, they're not going anywhere and they're part of the community, and we need to show compassion like for our LGBT Jews. And so that was really heartwarming to know that that's going into schools now, so that, you know, people who are 10 years younger than me might grow up with much more compassion from their teachers and from their fellow students, and hopefully less bullying.